In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, a priceless sapphire, the star of Serendib, vanishes from a locked jeweler's shop, sparking whispers of a cunning thief. 4 suspects, a nervous clerk, a wealthy widow, a sharp-eyed appraiser, and a shadowy outsider, are caught in a web of secrets. Enter Miss Jane Marple, a gentle spinster with a razor-sharp mind, who unravels the mystery through small clues. A whiff of lavender, a scratched lock, a hidden ledger. As motives unravel and truths emerge, Miss Marple proves that in a village of secrets, no crime stays hidden for long. Dive into the stolen rare gem, a classic Agatha Christie-style mystery, where every detail counts. Chapter 1. The Vanishing Jewel. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over St. Mary Mead, its light filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage. She sat by her window, her knitting needles moving with the steady precision of a metronome, a half-finished scarf of soft blue wool pooling in her lap. The village, with its thatched roofs and tidy gardens, seemed to hum with the quiet contentment of an ordinary Tuesday. Yet, as Miss Marple well knew, ordinary days in St. Mary Mead often concealed the most extraordinary secrets. The peace was broken by the hurried tap of footsteps on the garden path. Lily, Miss Marple's young maid, burst through the door, her cheeks flushed and her apron slightly askew. "Oh, Miss Marple, you'll never believe what's happened," she exclaimed, clutching a basket of vegetables from the market. "There's been a theft at Mr. Hawthorne's shop, a proper scandal. The star of Serendib, that grand sapphire, it's gone." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild blue eyes lifting to meet Lily's. "Gone, you say?" Her voice was gentle, but there was a keen edge to it, like a blade wrapped in silk. "Tell me everything, Lily, from the beginning." Lily, eager to spill the village's freshest gossip, set her basket on the table and launched into the tale. Mr. Hawthorne's jewelry shop, a modest establishment on High Street, known for its quality, if not its grandeur, had been the stage for a private viewing of the star of Serendib, a sapphire so rare it was said to capture the twilight in its depths. The gem, recently acquired from an estate in Ceylon, was to be the centerpiece of Mr. Hawthorne's collection, drawing interest from collectors as far as London. But that afternoon, during a viewing for Mrs. Elspeth Crane, a wealthy widow with a taste for finery, the sapphire had vanished from its locked velvet case. "They say it was there one moment, miss, and gone the next," Lily said, her eyes wide. "Mr. Hawthorne's in a right state, shouting about ruin. The shop was locked tight, and only 4 people were there. Mr. Grayson, the clerk, Mrs. Crane, Mr. Lyle, the appraiser from London. And, well, folks are whispering about a thief, a proper rogue, sneaking about the county." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile, though her eyes remained sharp. "A thief, Lily? How very dramatic. And yet, locked doors have a way of hiding simpler truths." She resumed her knitting, the soft click of her needles filling the room. "Who saw the gem last, do you know?" Lily frowned, thinking. "Mr. Grayson, I reckon. He's the one who fetched it from the safe for Mrs. Crane. But Mrs. Phipps at the bakery says he's been acting queer, all jumpy-like. And then there's Mrs. Crane, swanning about in her furs, though some say her money's not what it used to be. As for Mr. Lyle, he's a cold fish, that one, always looking at you like he's measuring your worth." "And the thief?" Miss Marple prompted, her tone deceptively mild. "Oh, just talk, miss. Old Mr. Jenkins swears he saw a stranger in a dark coat near the shop last week, but you know how he is after a pint." Lily giggled, then sobered. Still, it's a mystery, isn't it? Who'd steal such a gem, and how'd they do it with the shop all locked up? Miss Marple leaned back in her chair, her fingers still working the wool. Her mind, however, was elsewhere, sifting through the names and motives like threads in a tapestry. Mr. Grayson, the clerk, with his nervous disposition, perhaps a man in debt or hiding a secret. Mrs. Crane, whose wealth might be a facade, as wealth so often was. Mr. Lyle, the appraiser, whose expertise could mask cunning. And the thief, a convenient specter for a village fond of stories. She thought of her nephew Raymond's tales of city crimes, how often the simplest explanation lay in the flaws of those closest to the scene. "Fetch my shawl, Lily," Miss Marple said at last, setting her knitting aside. "I think I shall take a stroll to High Street. Fresh air does wonders for clearing the mind." Lily hesitated. "You're not going to poke about in this business, are you, miss? It's police work, surely." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Oh, I leave police work to Constable Reed, dear, but a little curiosity never hurt anyone. Besides, I've a mind to see Mr. Hawthorne's shop for myself. One never knows what small detail might catch the eye." As Lily scurried to fetch the shawl, Miss Marple gazed out at the village, where the evening shadows were lengthening. A stolen gem, a locked shop, and 4 souls caught in suspicion's web. It was, she thought, a puzzle as familiar as her knitting, each stitch revealing a pattern only when viewed with care. And Miss Marple, with her quiet ways and sharp mind, was very good at seeing patterns. Chapter 2. The Jeweler's Tale. The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead's High Street, lending an air of quiet mystery to the village. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, walked with a purposeful yet unhurried step toward Mr. Hawthorne's jewelry shop. The air was crisp, scented with damp earth and the faint sweetness of late blooming roses from a nearby garden. Her mind, however, was far from the pastoral calm, turning over the details of the stolen sapphire with the precision of a watchmaker. The star of Serendib, a gem of such rarity, had vanished under impossible circumstances, and Miss Marple knew that impossibilities often masked the simplest of human failings. The shop, a narrow building with a polished oak door and a single bay window, stood between the butcher's and Mrs. Phipps's bakery. Its sign, Hawthorne and Son, Fine Jewels, gleamed in gold leaf, though the son had long since moved to London, leaving Mr. Hawthorne to manage alone. As Miss Marple approached, she noted the window's display, a modest array of brooches and rings, none rivaling the lost sapphire's splendor. The shop's exterior was immaculate, its brass knocker gleaming, yet there was a subtle air of disquiet, as if the building itself sensed the scandal within. Inside, the shop was dim, the curtains drawn to protect the jewels from sunlight. A bell tinkled as Miss Marple entered, and Mr. Hawthorne emerged from the back, his face a study in distress. He was a stout man in his late 50s, with a florid complexion and a mustache that quivered when he spoke. His waistcoat strained against his waist, and his eyes, usually bright with a salesman's charm, were clouded with worry. "Miss Marple," he exclaimed, wringing his hands. "You've heard, of course. The whole village is buzzing. My sapphire, my star of Serendib, stolen. It's the ruin of me, I tell you." His voice rose to a theatrical pitch, and he gestured toward the empty velvet case on the counter, its lid flung open like a wound. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles and offered a sympathetic smile. "Dear Mr. Hawthorne, what a dreadful shock. I thought I might call to offer my condolences and perhaps to hear the tale directly from you. Gossip, you know, has a way of muddling things. Mr. Hawthorne seized the invitation, ushering her to a cushioned chair near the counter. "You're too kind, Miss Marple, too kind. Sit, please, and I'll tell you everything, every wretched detail." He paced as he spoke, his hands fluttering like startled birds. "It was yesterday afternoon, just past 3. Mrs. Elspeth Crane, you know her, of course, widow of that shipping magnate, had made an appointment to view the sapphire. She's been a customer for years, always partial to fine stones. I'd only just acquired the star from an estate in Ceylon, a flawless gem, cut to catch the light like a piece of the night sky. Worth a king's ransom, Miss Marple, and insured, thank heavens, but the loss of reputation, oh, it's unthinkable." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes roaming the shop. The counter was polished to a mirror-like sheen, its surface unmarred by scratches or smudges. A small brass key, likely for the display case, rested near a ledger. The walls held shelves of lesser jewels, each locked behind glass, and a heavy safe stood in the corner, its door slightly ajar. "Go on, Mr. Hawthorne," she prompted gently. "Who was present during this viewing?" He mopped his brow with a handkerchief. "Just 4 of us, Miss Marple, and I'd swear on my mother's grave the shop was secure. Myself, of course, overseeing the affair. Mr. Grayson, my clerk, a good lad, though a bit nervy of late. Mrs. Crane, the customer, and Mr. Vincent Lyle, the appraiser from London. He's a man of reputation, Miss Marple, worked with the best houses in Bond Street. He came to verify the sapphire's authenticity. You see, as Mrs. Crane insisted on an expert's opinion before considering a purchase." Miss Marple's needles, tucked into her bag, seemed to itch for movement, but her hands remained still, folded in her lap. "And the sequence of events?" she asked, her tone as mild as a summer breeze. Mr. Hawthorne leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "It was all very proper, I assure you. Mr. Grayson fetched the sapphire from the safe, there, in the corner, locked tight as a drum. He brought it to the counter where Mr. Lyle examined it under his loupe. He took his time, mind you, muttering about clarity and carats. Then he placed it in the velvet case, right here." He tapped the empty case, his fingers trembling. "Mrs. Crane arrived promptly at 3, and I unlocked the case to show her the gem. She was enchanted, said it reminded her of the sea at dusk. We discussed its history, its value. Oh, she was keen, Miss Marple. But then, when I went to close the case, the sapphire was gone. Gone, not a trace, and the shop locked front and back, the windows bolted." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, though her expression remained serene. "No one left the shop during this time?" "Not a soul," Mr. Hawthorne cried. "I locked the front door myself when Mrs. Crane arrived, as is my custom for private viewings. The back door leading to the alley was bolted from the inside. I checked it myself that morning. And the windows? Miss Marple, they're fixed shut, painted over years ago. It's as if the gem vanished into thin air, like some conjurer's trick." She rose, her movements slow and deliberate, and approached the counter. The velvet case was lined with deep blue fabric, its empty hollow stark against the rich backdrop. She ran a finger along the case's edge, noting its smooth hinges and the absence of any signs of tampering. "A curious trick, indeed," she murmured. "And what did each person do after the discovery?" Mr. Hawthorne sighed, sinking onto a stool. "Pandemonium, Miss Marple." Mrs. Crane gasped and clutched her pearls, insisting she'd not touch the gem. Mr. Lyle was calm, too calm, if you ask me, saying it must have been misplaced. Mr. Grayson turned pale as a ghost, stammering that he'd only handled the case as instructed. I sent for Constable Reed at once, but he's no closer to solving it than I am. He's out, chasing rumors of a thief in the county. But I ask you, how could an outsider get in without a trace? Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the safe, then to the back door, partially visible through a curtained archway. The back door, Mr. Hawthorne. May I see it? He blinked, surprised, but led her through the curtain to a small storeroom. The back door, heavy oak with a sturdy bolt, was indeed locked, its bolt rusted from disuse. A narrow window above it was sealed with old paint, its glass too small for even a child to pass through. Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes catching a faint disturbance in the dust on the floor, a smudge barely noticeable near the door's base. "You've not had visitors through here recently?" she asked. "None, Miss Marple. That door's not been opened in months, not since I had coal delivered last winter." He shook his head, his mustache drooping. "I'm at my wit's end. The insurance will cover the loss, but my reputation? Oh, who'll trust me now?" She patted his arm, her touch light but reassuring. There, Mr. Hawthorne. These things have a way of coming clear. Tell me, what of your clerk, Mr. Grayson? Has he been himself lately?" Mr. Hawthorne hesitated, his eyes darting to the curtain as if expecting Grayson to appear. "He's a good worker, but, well, he's been distracted, said something about debts, a failed scheme with a cousin in Bristol. I've not pressed him, but he's been jumpy, always looking over his shoulder. Still, I can't believe he'd steal, not from me. And Mr. Lyle." Miss Marple's voice was soft, but her question carried weight. "A professional through and through," Mr. Hawthorne said, though his tone held a hint of unease. "He's done appraisals for me before, always precise, but he's a cold sort, keeps to himself. Came down from London just for this job, said he had business in the area. He was alone with the gem for a few minutes before Mrs. Crane arrived, but I was in the shop the whole time, Miss Marple. I'd have seen if he'd done anything untoward." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloging the details. A nervous clerk with debts, a wealthy customer with a penchant for gems, an appraiser with time alone with the prize, and a locked shop with no signs of intrusion. She inhaled deeply, catching a faint, unexpected scent. Lavender, sharp and distinct, lingering in the air near the counter. It was not the usual polish or wax of a shop, but something more personal, like a gentleman's cologne. "Mrs. Crane," Miss Marple said, turning back to Mr. Hawthorne. "What was her demeanor during the viewing?" "Oh, all charm and flattery," he replied. "She admired the sapphire, asked about its origins, even hinted she might buy it for a gala in London. But when it vanished, she was as shocked as I was, perhaps more. Said she'd never seen such a thing, and I believe her. She's not the sort to play tricks." "Miss Marple, not with her standing." Miss Marple's lips twitched, as if amused by the notion of standing. She had seen many a fine reputation unravel under scrutiny. And after the theft was discovered, what did she do? She left in a huff, saying she'd not be party to such a fiasco. Promised to return when the matter was settled. Mr. Lyle offered to stay and help search, but we found nothing. Grayson was near tears. Poor lad, muttering about his job. Mr. Hawthorne's voice cracked. "I've sent for the insurance man, but oh, Miss Marple, what's to be done?" She stepped back to the counter, her eyes lingering on the brass key. You've been most helpful, Mr. Hawthorne. May I ask one more thing? The sapphire. When Mr. Lyle examined it, did he handle it directly or only through the case? Mr. Hawthorne frowned, thinking. Directly, I believe. He used his loupe, held the gem to the light, said it was flawless, a rarity. Then he placed it back in the case himself. I saw it with my own eyes. Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. Of course. Well, I shan't keep you longer. You've a business to run, and I've my own errands. But do keep me informed, Mr. Hawthorne. These matters often resolve themselves in unexpected ways. As she stepped back into the misty street, the bell tinkling behind her, Miss Marple's mind was a whirl of threads. The locked shop, the lavender scent, the smudge by the back door, the appraiser's solitary moment with the gem, each a stitch in a pattern not yet clear. She thought of her friend Mrs. Bantry's tales of a conjurer at a village fete, making coins disappear with a flick of the wrist. Sleight of hand, she mused, was not confined to stage performers. Someone in that shop had been clever, and Miss Marple, with her quiet ways and sharp eyes, intended to find out who. She pulled her shawl tighter and set off toward home, the village waking around her. The sapphire's theft was no mere crime. It was a puzzle of human nature, and Miss Marple had always been adept at solving such puzzles. As she passed Mrs. Phipps's bakery, the scent of fresh bread mingling with the morning air, she resolved to pay a call on young Mr. Grayson next. A nervous clerk, she knew, often had more to tell than he realized. Chapter 3. The Clerk's Burden. The afternoon sun dipped low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the village green as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the modest lodgings of Mr. Edward Grayson, the jeweler's clerk. Her steps were measured, her black lace-up shoes clicking softly on the path, but her mind was alight with the puzzle of the stolen sapphire. The star of Serendib's disappearance had stirred the village into a frenzy of speculation, and Miss Marple, with her knack for seeing through the fog of human folly, knew that the truth often lay in the quiet corners of a person's life. Mr. Grayson, with his nervous demeanor and whispered debts, seemed a promising place to begin. The clerk lived in a small, ivy-clad cottage at the edge of the village, rented from Mrs. Harrow, a widow known for her sharp tongue and sharper eyes. As Miss Marple approached, she noted the cottage's faded paint and the single geranium pot by the door, its petals drooping as if sharing its occupant's unease. She knocked gently, her gloved hand steady, and waited. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing Mr. Grayson, his face pale and his shirt collar slightly askew. He was a young man, no more than 25, with sandy hair and eyes that darted like a cornered animal's. "Miss Marple?" he said, his voice tinged with surprise and a hint of dread. "What brings you here?" She smiled, her expression as warm as a vicar's wife offering tea. "I was passing, Mr. Grayson, and thought I might trouble you for a moment's chat. May I come in? I find these autumn afternoons rather chilly for standing about." He hesitated, then stepped aside, ushering her into a cramped parlor. The room was sparsely furnished, a worn armchair, a small table cluttered with papers, and a fireplace with a single log smoldering fitfully. Miss Marple settled into the armchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and took in the details. The ink-stained blotter, the half-empty teacup, the faint smell of tobacco clinging to the air. Mr. Grayson hovered near the table, his fingers twisting a frayed cuff. "I suppose you've heard about the sapphire," he began before she could speak. It's all anyone talks about. I swear, Miss Marple, I had nothing to do with it. I only fetched it from the safe, like Mr. Hawthorne asked. I'd never steal, not from him, not from anyone." His voice cracked, and Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes kind but piercing. "Of course, Mr. Grayson, no one is accusing you. But you were there, and I find that those closest to a mystery often see things others miss. Tell me, if you will, exactly what happened yesterday afternoon." He sank onto a stool, running a hand through his hair. "It was a normal day, or so I thought. Mrs. Crane was coming at 3 to see the Star of Serendib. Mr. Hawthorne was all in a flutter. He always is with big clients. Mr. Lyle, the appraiser, arrived early, around 2:30. He wanted to check the gem before the viewing, said it was standard practice. I got it from the safe, handed it to him, and he took it to the counter with his loupe and all his tools. I was busy in the back, sorting invoices, but I could hear him muttering about the stone's quality." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the papers on the table, noting a letter with a Bristol postmark, half hidden under a ledger. "And Mr. Lyle was alone with the sapphire for some time?" Grayson nodded, his hands fidgeting. "A few minutes, maybe 10. Mr. Hawthorne was in the shop, but he was polishing the display case, fussing over the velvet. I came out when Mrs. Crane arrived, and Mr. Lyle put the gem in the case. Mrs. Crane looked at it, said it was beautiful, but then, poof, it was gone when Mr. Hawthorne went to lock the case. I don't know how it happened, Miss Marple, I swear." She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft as a whisper of silk. "You seem troubled, Mr. Grayson, more than one might expect, even for such a shock. Is there something weighing on you?" His face flushed, and he looked away, his fingers tightening on the table's edge. "It's nothing, really. Just things haven't been easy. I had a venture with my cousin in Bristol, a small shop we thought would turn a profit. It didn't, and now I owe money, more than I can pay on a clerk's wage. But I'd never steal, Miss Marple. I'm not that sort." She nodded, her expression unchanged, but her mind cataloging his words. Debt, she knew, could drive a man to desperate acts, though Grayson's earnestness rang true. "I'm sure you're honest, Mr. Grayson, but tell me, did you notice anything unusual about Mr. Lyle or Mrs. Crane? Their manner, perhaps, or something they said?" He frowned, thinking. Mrs. Crane was her usual self, all airs and graces, talking about her travels and how the sapphire would look at some fancy ball. Mr. Lyle, though, he was odd. Kept checking his watch, like he had somewhere to be. And he was particular about the gem, kept holding it up to the light, turning it this way and that. Said it was one of the finest he'd seen, but his eyes were, I don't know, sharp, like he was planning something. Miss Marple's lips twitched, a faint smile that hid her growing interest. "And after the theft was discovered, what did you all do?" "It was chaos," Grayson said, his voice low. "Mr. Hawthorne was shouting, Mrs. Crane was clutching her bag like it might vanish too, and Mr. Lyle just stood there, cool as you please, saying we must have misplaced it. Misplaced. A sapphire like that doesn't just slip down a crack in the floorboards. I helped search the shop, every drawer, every corner, but it was gone. Constable Reed came, asked a lot of questions, but he didn't find anything either." She rose, smoothing her skirt, and glanced at the window, where the geranium's shadow swayed in the fading light. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Grayson. These things are trying, but they often come clear with time. Might I ask one more question? Did you notice any unusual scents in the shop yesterday? Something out of place, perhaps? He blinked, surprised. Scents? Well, now you mention it, there was a whiff of something. Like flowers, maybe. Lavender, I think. I noticed it when Mr. Lyle was at the counter. Thought it was odd, but I was too busy to dwell on it. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her face remained serene. Lavender, you say? How curious. Well, I mustn't keep you. Thank you, Mr. Grayson, and do try not to worry. These matters have a way of resolving themselves. As she stepped into the evening, air. The village settling into its quiet rhythms, Miss Marple's mind was a whirl of threads. The lavender scent, noted first at the shop and now confirmed by Grayson, pointed to Mr. Lyle, whose meticulous manner might conceal more than expertise. The clerk's debts, too, were a thread to tug, though his fear seemed more of exposure than guilt. She thought of her old friend, Miss Hartnell, whose nephew had once fallen into debt and nearly ruined himself with rash decisions. People, Miss Marple knew, were rarely as simple as they seemed. She turned toward home, the village green now cloaked in twilight. Tomorrow she would call on Mrs. Crane, whose wealth and poise might hide their own secrets. For now, the sapphire's absence was a knot in the tapestry of Saint. Mary Mead and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, was determined to unravel it. Chapter 4. The Customer's Charade. The morning was bright in St. Mary Mead, with a crispness in the air that hinted at autumn's approach. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped lightly over her shoulders, walked the short distance to Mrs. Elspeth Crane's grand house on the edge of the village. The residence, a Georgian affair with tall windows and manicured hedges, stood as a testament to the late Mr. Crane's shipping fortune, though Miss Marple, with her keen eye for human nature, suspected that even grand houses could harbor fragile facades. The theft of the Star of Serendib had cast a shadow over the village, and Mrs. Crane, as one of the four present at the scene, was a thread in the tapestry Miss Marple was patiently weaving. The maid, a young woman with a starched cap and a nervous glance, ushered Miss Marple into a drawing room, resplendent with polished mahogany and heavy silk drapes. A crystal chandelier caught the sunlight, scattering prisms across the walls, and a vase of hothouse roses perfumed the air. Mrs. Crane sat on a velvet settee, her furs replaced by a tailored dress of deep burgundy, her neck adorned with a strand of pearls that gleamed with understated elegance. She rose as Miss Marple entered, her smile gracious but tinged with a wariness that did not escape the older woman's notice. "Miss Marple, how delightful," Mrs. Crane said, her voice smooth as polished silver. "I confess I'm surprised to see you. Surely you're not here about that dreadful business at Hawthorne's shop." Miss Marple settled into an offered chair, her hands resting lightly on her bag. "Oh, I like to keep abreast of village matters, Mrs. Crane. The loss of such a gem is no small thing, and I thought you might share your view of the affair. You were there, after all, and I find a woman's perspective often sees what others overlook." Mrs. Crane's smile tightened, and she reached for a lace handkerchief, her fingers toying with its edge. "You're too kind to think my perspective of value. It was a shocking incident, nothing more. I went to view the sapphire. Such a lovely stone. Quite the finest I've seen since a tourmaline I bought in Paris years ago. But I assure you, I had no part in its disappearance. Why, the very idea is absurd." Miss Marple's eyes, mild behind her spectacles, noted the faint flush on Mrs. Crane's cheeks and the quick movement of her hands. "Of course, no one suggests otherwise. she said soothingly. "But do tell me how it unfolded. Mr. Hawthorne's account was rather emotional, and I'd value your clarity." Mrs. Crane leaned back, her posture regal despite the flicker of unease in her eyes. "It was quite straightforward, really. I arrived at 3, as arranged, to see the Star of Serendib. Mr. Hawthorne was his usual charming self, fussing over the display. That young clerk, Grayson, was hovering about, looking as if he'd drop something any moment. And Mr. Lyle, the appraiser, was there, all business with his loupe and notebook. He'd already examined the gem, I believe, and it was in the case when I arrived. I admired it, such a deep, luminous blue, like the sea at twilight. We spoke of its history, its value. I was considering it for a gala in London next month, but when Mr. Hawthorne went to close the case, the sapphire was simply gone. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of polite curiosity. "And you saw nothing untoward? No one touched the case, perhaps, or moved in a way that seemed odd?" Mrs. Crane shook her head, her pearls catching the light. "Nothing at all. I was standing right there, watching the gem. Mr. Hawthorne opened the case to show it, and I leaned in to look. Mr. Lyle was to my left, making notes, and Grayson was behind the counter, fidgeting as usual. The shop was locked. I saw Mr. Hawthorne turn the key in the front door when I arrived. It's baffling, Miss Marple, like something from a penny dreadful." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile, as if amused by the comparison. "Indeed, it does sound like a tale. And after the theft was discovered, what was the mood?" Mrs. Crane's handkerchief twisted tighter in her hands. "Oh, it was dreadful. Mr. Hawthorne was beside himself, shouting about ruin. Grayson looked ready to faint, stammering that he'd done nothing wrong. Mr. Lyle was infuriatingly calm, suggesting the gem might have been misplaced, as if such a thing could happen. I was quite upset myself. I'd set my heart on that sapphire, you see. I left soon after, as the atmosphere was intolerable. I told Mr. Hawthorne I'd return when the matter was settled." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to a silver-framed photograph on the mantel. A younger Mrs. Crane with her late husband, both smiling aboard a ship. "You travel often, I believe. Lily, my maid, mentioned you've been to London recently, and abroad as well." Mrs. Crane's eyes narrowed slightly, though her smile held. "Yes, I enjoy travel. London for the season, and Paris last spring. I've a fondness for art and jewels, as you might guess. But what has that to do with the theft?" "Oh, nothing directly," Miss Marple said airily, her tone as light as a breeze. "I only thought you might have heard talk of such thefts in other cities. Jewel thieves, I'm told, are clever these days, with all sorts of tricks." Mrs. Crane laughed, a brittle sound. "I'm no expert on thieves, Miss Marple. I buy my jewels honestly from reputable dealers. If anything, I'm the victim here, having been caught up in this mess." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her face remained serene. "Of course, but you mentioned Paris. Did you visit any auction houses there? I recall my nephew Raymond speaking of a sale where a gem was swapped for a fake. Quite clever, really." The handkerchief stilled in Mrs. Crane's hands, and for a moment her composure wavered. "Auction houses. I may have visited one or two for curiosity's sake, but I assure you my interest is in acquiring, not selling." She rose abruptly, smoothing her dress. "Forgive me, Miss Marple, but I've an engagement soon. Is there anything else?" Miss Marple stood, her movements slow and deliberate. "You've been most kind, Mrs. Crane. Just one small thing. Did you notice any particular scent in the shop? Lavender, perhaps?" Mrs. Crane frowned, her brow creasing. Lavender? I don't recall. The shop smelled of polish and perhaps Mr. Hawthorne's cigar. Why do you ask? No reason, Miss Marple said, her smile enigmatic. Just a fancy of mine. Thank you, Mrs. Crane. I shan't trouble you further. As she stepped into the garden, the maid closing the door behind her, Miss Marple's mind was busy. Mrs. Crane's poise was polished, but the cracks were there, the fidgeting hands, the guarded answers about her travels, the quick dismissal of the lavender scent. She thought of her friend Mrs. Bantry's cousin, who had once hidden financial troubles behind a veneer of wealth, selling heirlooms to maintain appearances. Mrs. Crane's fortune, perhaps, was not as secure as the village believed. The maid, lingering by the gate, caught Miss Marple's eye. "Excuse me, miss," she said hesitantly, "but I couldn't help overhearing. You asked about Mrs. Crane's travels. She's been to London 3 times this month, and I heard her talking to someone on the telephone about selling jewels abroad. Said it was for a friend, but she sounded awfully secretive." Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her mind sharpened. "Thank you, dear. It's often the small things that matter most." She pressed a shilling into the maid's hand and turned toward the village, the sun now high overhead. The sapphire's theft was a knot of motives and opportunities, and Mrs. Crane, with her polished exterior and hidden anxieties, was a thread worth following. The lavender scent, noted by Grayson and absent in Mrs. Crane's recollection, pointed elsewhere, perhaps to Mr. Lyle. Miss Marple thought of a village fete, years ago, where a conjurer had distracted the crowd with charm while palming a coin. Distraction, she mused, was a thief's best tool. As she walked, her shawl fluttering in the breeze, she resolved to seek out Mr. Lyle next. His calm demeanor and solitary moments with the gem were threads she could not ignore. Chapter 5. The Appraiser's Mask. The evening light softened the outlines of St. Mary Mead, bathing the village in a gentle glow as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the vicarage. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and late roses, and the distant chime of the church clock marked the hour. She had arranged to meet Mr. Vincent Lyle, the appraiser, under the guise of a casual chat over sherry, an invitation extended through the vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, who was always eager to play hostess. Miss Marple knew that Mr. Lyle's expertise with gems made him a pivotal figure in the theft of the Star of Serendib, and his cool demeanor, as reported by both Mr. Hawthorne and young Grayson, intrigued her. In her experience, such composure often cloaked a deeper intent. The vicarage parlor was cozy, its walls lined with books and a fire crackling in the grate. Mrs. Clement, a bustling woman with a penchant for matchmaking, greeted Miss Marple warmly, her eyes bright with curiosity about the village scandal. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's too thrilling, isn't it? A stolen sapphire, right here in St. Mary Mead. And Mr. Lyle, such a refined gentleman, though a bit standoffish, don't you think?" Miss Marple smiled, settling into a chintz-covered chair. "He does seem a man of precision, Mrs. Clement. I'm eager to hear his thoughts on the matter. One never knows what an outsider's eye might notice." Mr. Lyle arrived promptly, his suit as immaculate as his reputation. He was a tall, lean man in his early 40s, with sharp features and hair slicked back with meticulous care. His eyes, a pale gray, held a calculating glint, and his handshake was firm but brief. He accepted a glass of sherry from Mrs. Clement, his movements precise, and took a seat opposite Miss Marple, his posture as controlled as a chess player awaiting an opponent's move. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "Mrs. Clement tells me you're interested in the unfortunate incident at Hawthorne's shop. I'm afraid it's a perplexing case, but I'm happy to assist with what little I know." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled over the rim of her glass. "You're very kind, Mr. Lyle. I'm merely a curious old woman, but I find such mysteries fascinating. You examined the sapphire, I understand, before it vanished. Could you tell me about that moment?" He nodded, his fingers resting lightly on the stem of his glass. "Of course. I was engaged by Mr. Hawthorne to verify the Star of Serendib's authenticity, a task I've performed for many fine jewels. I arrived at the shop around 2:30, and young Grayson brought the gem from the safe. I examined it at the counter using my loupe and a light to check its clarity and cut. It was exquisite, flawless, with a depth of color rare even for a salon sapphire. I confirmed its value, placed it in the velvet case, and stepped aside when Mrs. Crane arrived. That was the last I saw of it." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of polite interest. "And you were alone with the gem for some time, I believe? Mr. Hawthorne was preparing the shop, and Mr. Grayson was in the back." A faint tightening of Lyle's jaw was the only sign of discomfort. "Briefly, yes, perhaps 10 minutes, but Mr. Hawthorne was in the room, polishing the display case. I assure you, Miss Marple, my focus was solely on the appraisal. I had no opportunity, nor inclination, to tamper with the gem." "Of course," she said, her voice as soft as a lullaby. "Your expertise must keep you busy. I hear you travel often. Paris, perhaps? My nephew Raymond once mentioned auction houses there, quite discreet ones, where rare gems change hands." Lyle's hand paused on his glass, a tremor so slight it might have gone unnoticed by anyone less observant. "Paris, yes," he said, recovering smoothly. "I visit for professional reasons, research mostly, and to keep abreast of the market. Auction houses are part of my work, but I deal in appraisals, not sales." Miss Marple sipped her sherry, her eyes never leaving his. "How fascinating. I imagine such places see all sorts of transactions, some less straightforward than others. A friend once told me of a sapphire swapped for a paste replica. Quite a clever trick, though dishonest, of course." His smile was thin, almost a grimace. "Such things happen, sadly, but they require a level of deceit I find distasteful. My role is to ensure authenticity, not to undermine it." He set his glass down with a faint clink, his fingers steady once more. Mrs. Clement, sensing a lull, chimed in. "Oh, but Mr. Lyle, you must have seen such wonders in your work. Tell us, what was the sapphire like? I've only heard it described as a marvel." Lyle's expression softened, though his eyes remained guarded. "It was extraordinary, Mrs. Clement. A deep, vibrant blue, with a star effect that seemed to pulse in the light. I've seen few stones to rival it. Its loss is a tragedy for Mr. Hawthorne, and for the trade." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away his words and the subtle tension beneath them. She thought of her old school friend, Miss Weatherby, whose brother had once been a jeweler, caught in a scandal over a forged provenance. Experts, she knew, could wield their knowledge as deftly as a thief's tools. "And after the theft was discovered?" she asked. "What was the atmosphere in the shop?" "Chaos, naturally," Lyle said, his tone dry. "Hawthorne was distraught, shouting about ruin. Grayson was a bundle of nerves, practically shaking. Mrs. Crane was indignant, as if the theft were a personal affront. I suggested we search the shop, but nothing turned up. I stayed to assist, though there was little to be done." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to his hands, noting the absence of a wedding ring and the faint callus on his index finger, perhaps from years of wielding a loop. "You remained calm, I'm told, a rare quality in such a moment." He shrugged, a gesture too casual for his precise demeanor. "Panic solves nothing, Miss Marple. I've seen my share of mishaps in the trade. Gems are misplaced, though rarely stolen so brazenly." She smiled, her eyes crinkling with what might have been amusement. Misplaced indeed, and yet the shop was locked, the windows secure. It's quite the conundrum. She paused, then added, "I couldn't help but notice a scent in the shop when I visited, a hint of lavender, rather unusual for a jeweler's. Did you notice it?" Lyle's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened briefly on the arm of his chair. "Lavender? I don't recall. The shop smelled of polish, perhaps, and Hawthorne's cigar. My attention was on the gem, not the air." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone disarming. "Just a passing thought. Well, I mustn't keep you, Mr. Lyle. You've been most generous with your time." As he rose, offering a polite bow, Mrs. Clement bustled over with more sherry, but Miss Marple declined, citing the lateness of the hour. She stepped into the cool evening, the vicarage gate creaking behind her. The village was quiet now, its lights winking like stars against the dusk. Her mind, however, was far from still. Mr. Lyle's composure was a mask, she thought, polished but not impenetrable. The tremor in his hand, the guarded mention of Paris, the denial of the lavender scent, all were threads in the pattern. She recalled a village curate years ago, whose calm exterior had hidden a penchant for petty theft, undone by a single careless word. The lavender, noted by Grayson and absent in Mrs. Crane's account, clung to Lyle like a shadow. It was a small thing, but Miss Marple knew that small things often unraveled great secrets. As she walked home, the church clock striking 7, she resolved to inquire further about Lyle's travels. A discreet auction house in Paris, perhaps, held more than research. For now, the sapphire remained a ghost in Saint. Merry Mead, but Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was closing in on its trail. Chapter 6. Whispers of a Thief. The morning mist had burned away, leaving St. Mary Mead bathed in the pale gold of an autumn sun. Miss Jane Marple, her basket of knitting tucked under her arm, walked the winding lanes toward the village square, her thoughts as intricate as the patterns she wove. The theft of the Star of Serendib had woven a web of suspicion, and though she had spoken with Mr. Grayson, Mrs. Crane, and Mr. Lyle, the puzzle remained tantalizingly incomplete. The village buzzed with talk of a mysterious thief, a shadowy figure glimpsed on the outskirts, and Miss Marple, ever attentive to the currents of gossip, knew that such tales often held a kernel of truth, or a deliberate distraction. She paused by the post office, where Mrs. Wimpole, the postmistress, was sweeping the step with vigorous strokes. "Good morning, Miss Marple," Mrs. Wimpole called, her eyes bright with the prospect of news. "Have you heard about the thief? Old Mr. Jenkins swears he saw a man skulking near the jeweler's last week, all in black, like a villain from a play." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes crinkling with interest. "Mr. Jenkins does have a vivid imagination, doesn't he? But I'd be glad to hear more. What exactly did he see?" Mrs. Wimpole leaned on her broom, eager to share. He was coming back from the Blue Boar, mind you, so it might be the ale talking, but he says it was dusk, and he saw a man in a dark coat near the alley behind Hawthorne's shop. Tall, he said, and moving quick, like he didn't want to be seen. Jenkins called out, but the fellow vanished into the shadows. Now everyone's saying it's the thief who took the sapphire. Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the detail. How intriguing. And no one else saw this stranger? Not that I've heard, Mrs. Wimpole admitted, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But it's got Constable Reed in a tizzy. He's been poking about the lanes, asking questions, though he's no closer to catching anyone. Says it must be an outsider. Nobody in St. Mary Mead would do such a thing. Miss Marple's lips twitched, as if amused by the notion of village innocence. Constable Reed is thorough, I'm sure. Thank you, Mrs. Wimpole. I'll keep an eye out for dark-coated strangers. She continued her walk, her steps taking her toward the alley behind Mr. Hawthorne's shop. The narrow passage, flanked by high walls and overgrown with nettles, was seldom used except for deliveries. She paused at its entrance, noting the cobbled path and the back door of the shop, its oak weathered but sturdy. The bolt, as Mr. Hawthorne had said, was rusted, and the small window above was sealed tight with paint. Yet Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught a detail, a faint scuff in the dust near the door, not unlike the smudge she'd seen inside. It was fresh, no more than a day or two old, and beside it lay a crushed leaf, its edges curling as if trodden underfoot. She bent, her joints protesting slightly, and examined the leaf. It was from a lavender bush, its scent faint but unmistakable when she pressed it between her fingers. Curious, she murmured, straightening. Lavender again, threading through the mystery like a leitmotif. She recalled Mr. Lyle's denial of the scent, Grayson's nervous confirmation, and Mrs. Crane's vague dismissal. The alley, though, suggested another possibility. Someone had been here, perhaps watching, perhaps waiting. Miss Marple made her way to the village hall, where Constable Reed was holding court with a small crowd of curious locals. The constable, a broad-shouldered man with a penchant for grand theories, was in full flow. "Mark my words," he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "This is the work of a professional thief. I've sent word to the county police. They know of a rogue working the towns hereabouts. Slips in, slips out, no trace. But I'll have him. You'll see." Miss Marple approached, her demeanor as unassuming as ever. "Good morning, Constable Reed. You seem quite convinced of this thief's existence. Have you found any evidence to support Mr. Jenkins's tale?" Reed puffed out his chest, pleased to have an audience. "Not yet, Miss Marple, but I'm on the scent. That alley's a likely spot for a thief to lurk, close to the shop, out of sight. I've checked the door myself. It's bolted tight, but a clever sort might have found another way. Maybe climbed the wall or picked a lock we haven't spotted." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "A very agile thief, then. But tell me, Constable, have you considered those inside the shop? After all, the sapphire vanished with the doors locked and the windows secure." Reed's face reddened slightly. "Well, of course, I've questioned them all. Grayson, Mrs. Crane, Mr. Lyle. Grayson's a nervous wreck, but he's no thief, I'd wager. Mrs. Crane's too grand for such a thing, and Mr. Lyle's a professional, though a bit too smooth for my liking. No, Miss Marple, it's an outsider, I'm sure of it. Why, just yesterday, a lad at the butcher's saw a stranger near the church, carrying a bag." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite agreement. though her mind was elsewhere. She thought of her old friend Miss Paulet, whose tales of a phantom burglar in her village had turned out to be a neighbor's son, sneaking out at night. Strangers were convenient scapegoats, but the truth, she suspected, lay closer to home. "You're doing fine work, Constable," she said. "Do let me know if you find that bag-carrying stranger." As she left the hall, she encountered Lily, her maid, hurrying across the square with a parcel from the grocer. "Oh, Miss Marple," Lily exclaimed, her cheeks pink from the chill. "I heard something you'll want to know. Mrs. Harrow, who lets the cottage to Mr. Grayson, says she saw Mr. Lyle leaving the shop late the night before the theft. He had a small case with him, like one of those fancy ones for jewels. She thought it odd, him being there after hours." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained soft. "Did she now? That's most interesting, Lily. And what time was this?" "Near 9, she said. The shop was dark, but she saw him by the street lamp, locking the door behind him. She didn't think much of it till the theft, but now she's telling everyone he's up to no good." Miss Marple patted Lily's arm. "You've a good ear, dear. Keep it open, won't you?" She turned toward home, the lavender leaf still tucked in her pocket. Mr. Lyle's late-night visit, the case in his hand, the scent that followed him. These were no coincidences. She recalled a village scandal years ago when a trusted clerk had used his access to pilfer small sums, his guilt revealed by a single misplaced receipt. Access, she knew, was a thief's greatest ally. As she reached her cottage, the sun dipping toward the horizon, Miss Marple resolved to revisit the shop. The alley's scuff mark and the lavender leaf suggested someone had been there, perhaps not a phantom thief, but someone with a key or a plan. Mr. Lyle, with his expertise and his solitary moments with the sapphire, was a thread she could not ignore. She would need to tread carefully, for a man of his precision would not unravel easily. But Miss Marple, with her quiet ways and sharper mind, was adept at pulling the right threads. Chapter 7. A pattern emerges. The late morning air in St. Mary Mead carried the faint tang of fallen leaves, and the village square hummed with the subdued bustle of market day. Miss Jane Marple, her basket swinging lightly on her arm, moved through the crowd with the quiet grace of one, accustomed to observing without being observed. Her mind, however, was far from the stalls of apples and fresh bread. The theft of the Star of Serendib had woven a complex web, and each conversation, with Mr. Grayson, Mrs. Crane, Mr. Lyle, and even Constable Reed, had added a thread to the tapestry. Yet the pattern remained elusive, like a melody half heard. Today she hoped to find the note that would bring it into focus. She paused near the village hall, where a small crowd had gathered for a charity tea organized by Mrs. Clement. The hall's doors stood open, spilling out the clink of teacups and the murmur of voices. Miss Marple's sharp eyes scanned the scene, noting the familiar faces. Mrs. Wimpole gossiping with the baker's wife, young Lily darting about with a tray of scones, and, to her interest, Mrs. Elspeth Crane and Mr. Vincent Lyle standing in a corner, their heads bent in conversation. Their voices were low, but Mrs. Crane's posture, stiff, her hand clutching her handbag, suggested more than casual pleasantries. Miss Marple edged closer, feigning interest in a table of knitted shawls. She caught fragments of their exchange. "Must be discreet," from Mrs. Crane, and "no need for concern," from Lyle, his tone as smooth as polished glass. When Mrs. Crane's eyes flicked toward the room and met Miss Marple's, she started, her face tightening. Lyle followed her gaze, his expression unreadable, but his hand tightening briefly on his teacup. They parted abruptly, Mrs. Crane moving toward the vicar's wife and Lyle toward the door. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. "How curious," she murmured, adjusting her shawl. "A private matter, indeed." She recalled a long-ago incident in her friend Mrs. Dane Calthrop's village, where a whispered argument at a fete had unraveled a scheme of blackmail. People, she knew, often betrayed themselves in moments they thought unwatched. She approached Lily, who was refilling a teapot, and lowered her voice. "Lily, dear, you've a knack for hearing things others miss. Have you noticed Mrs. Crane and Mr. Lyle speaking together before today?" Lily's eyes widened, delighted to be consulted. "Oh, Miss Marple, I have. Just yesterday I saw them near the church, talking all quiet-like. Mrs. Crane looked cross, and Mr. Lyle was patting her arm, like he was soothing her. I couldn't hear much, but she said something about risky business, and not what we agreed. I thought it was about her buying the sapphire, but now I'm not so sure." Miss Marple nodded, her mind slotting the information into place. "You're a treasure, Lily. Keep your ears open, won't you?" She pressed a penny into the girl's hand and moved toward the shawl table, her thoughts racing. A connection between Mrs. Crane and Mr. Lyle, however tenuous, was a new thread. Was it a shared interest in the sapphire, or something deeper? A pact, perhaps, or a misunderstanding turned sour? Her musings were interrupted by Mrs. Clement, who bustled over with a plate of biscuits. "Miss Marple, you must try these. And what do you make of this sapphire business? The whole village is talking of nothing else. I heard Constable Reed's chasing a thief, but I can't help thinking it's someone closer to home." Miss Marple accepted a biscuit, her expression serene. "You may be right, Mrs. Clement. Villages have a way of hiding their secrets in plain sight. Tell me, have you heard anything about Mr. Lyle's movements? He's not a local, after all." Mrs. Clement leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Well, now you mention it. My cook saw him at the station 2 nights ago, catching the late train to London. Had a case with him, she said, like one of those fancy ones for jewels. She thought it odd, him traveling so soon after the theft." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her face remained placid. "How interesting. And this was after the theft?" "Oh, yes, the very next evening. I told Constable Reed, but he's so set on his phantom thief he barely listened." Mrs. Clement sighed, then brightened. "Do stay for another cup, Miss Marple. It's not often we have such excitement." Miss Marple declined politely, citing a need to check her garden, and stepped into the square. The information about Lyle's late-night journey, combined with Mrs. Harrow's sighting of him at the shop the night before the theft, painted a picture she could not ignore. She decided to revisit Mr. Hawthorne's shop, hoping to examine the scene with fresh eyes. The lavender scent, the scuff in the alley, and now the whispered argument. All pointed to Lyle, yet Mrs. Crane's involvement nagged at her. Was the widow a conspirator, a dupe, or merely a woman caught in the wrong place? The shop was quiet when she arrived, Mr. Hawthorne behind the counter, his face still etched with worry. "Miss Marple, back again?" he said, managing a weak smile. "I'm afraid there's no news. Constable Reed's chasing shadows, and I'm left counting the cost." She offered a sympathetic nod, her eyes scanning the counter. "I thought I might take another look, Mr. Hawthorne, if you don't mind. Sometimes a second glance reveals what the first missed." He waved a hand, too weary to question her. "Be my guest. I've gone over every inch myself, but it's no use. The sapphire's gone, and my reputation with it." Miss Marple moved to the display case, its empty velvet hollow a silent accusation. She examined the lock, a sturdy brass mechanism, and noted a faint scratch on its underside, barely visible unless one looked closely. It was not the mark of a forced entry, but of something subtler. A tool, perhaps, or a moment of carelessness. She straightened, her gaze drifting to the safe in the corner, its door now closed, and the curtained archway to the storeroom. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, her voice soft. "When Mr. Lyle examined the sapphire, did he use any tools beyond his loupe? A cloth, perhaps, or a small case?" Hawthorne frowned, thinking. "A cloth, yes, to handle the gem. He's particular about not touching stones directly. Says it preserves their clarity. He had a small leather case, too, for his tools, but he didn't open it much. Why do you ask?" "Just a thought," she said, her smile disarming. "And the lavender scent I noticed last time. Has it been present since?" He shook his head. "Not that I've noticed. It was strong that day, though, now you mention it. I thought it might be Mrs. Crane's perfume, but she said it wasn't hers." Miss Marple thanked him and stepped into the storeroom, her eyes returning to the back door. The smudge in the dust was still there, joined now by a faint imprint of a heel, too small for a man's boot, but too deliberate for a casual passerby. She thought of Lyle's precise movements, his guarded responses, and the case seen in his hand. A conjurer, she mused, needed only a moment to work his magic, and Lyle had had moments alone with the gem. As she left the shop, the village square now emptying as the market wound down, Miss Marple felt the pattern taking shape. Lyle's late-night visit, his argument with Mrs. Crane, the lavender scent, the scratch on the lock. All were stitches in a design that pointed to sleight of hand, not brute force. She recalled a story from her youth of a village doctor who had pilfered medicines under the guise of inventory checks, his calm demeanor masking his guilt until a single vial betrayed him. Lyle, she suspected, was no phantom thief, but a man with opportunity and motive. She resolved to speak with Constable Reed again, to steer his attention from mythical strangers to the tangible clues within the shop. For now, she walked home, the autumn light fading into dusk, her mind weaving the threads of St. Mary Mead's latest mystery into a pattern only she could see. Chapter 8. The Appraiser's Secret. The soft glow of lamplight spilled from the windows of Miss Jane Marple's cottage as dusk settled over St. Mary Mead. Inside, the fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows on the walls, while Miss Marple sat in her favorite armchair, her knitting needles idle for once. Her mind, however, was far from still, weaving together the threads of the Star of Serendib's theft with the precision of her stitches. The lavender scent, the scratch on the lock, Mr. Lyle's late-night visit to the shop, and his hushed exchange with Mrs. Crane had formed a pattern that pointed unmistakably to the appraiser. Yet Miss Marple knew that suspicion alone was not enough. The truth required a gentle tug to unravel fully. She had invited Mr. Vincent Lyle for tea, a request delivered through Mrs. Clement with the promise of discussing village history, a pretext no one could refuse without seeming churlish. The vicar's wife had been delighted to play intermediary, her curiosity about the theft barely contained. "He's such a polished gentleman," Mrs. Clement had said. "But there's something about him, don't you think, Miss Marple? like a cat watching a mouse. Miss Marple had smiled, her eyes twinkling. Cats are often too clever for their own good. Mrs. Clement, we shall see. Now, as the clock on the mantel struck 4, a sharp knock announced Lyle's arrival. Lily opened the door, her apron crisp and her manner deferential, though her glance at Miss Marple held a spark of excitement. Mr. Lyle entered, his suit as immaculate as ever, his gray eyes scanning the room with the alertness of a man accustomed to assessing value. He carried a faint scent of lavender, so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by a less observant host. "Miss Marple," he said, bowing slightly, "this is a charming invitation. I confess I'm not often called to discuss village history, but I'm happy to oblige." She gestured to a chair, her smile as warm as the firelight. "You're very kind, Mr. Lyle. Do sit. Lily has made scones, and I find a cup of tea does wonders for conversation. I thought you might enjoy a respite from the village's current excitement." He settled into the chair, his movements precise, and accepted a cup from Lily. "The theft, you mean? A sorry business. I fear poor Hawthorne will never recover his peace of mind." Miss Marple poured her own tea, her hands steady. "Indeed, it's quite the scandal. I've been turning it over in my mind, as one does. You, with your expertise, must have seen such things before. Tell me, how might a gem like the star vanish from a locked shop?" Lyle's lips curved into a faint smile, though his eyes remained guarded. "A locked shop does complicate matters, but thieves are inventive. A skilled picklock, perhaps, or a distraction during the viewing. I've seen cases where a gem was swapped with a replica, paste or glass, you understand, though it requires a steady hand and a moment's inattention." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite curiosity. "How fascinating. And you examined the sapphire yourself, I believe. You had it in your hands, alone, before Mrs. Crane arrived?" His fingers tightened briefly on the teacup, a flicker of tension that vanished as quickly as it came. "Briefly, yes. I verified its authenticity, as was my duty. Mr. Hawthorne was present, polishing his counter. I placed the gem in the case afterward, and that was that." "Of course," she said, her voice soft as a whisper of silk. "And yet, it's curious, isn't it? The shop was locked, the windows sealed, and still the sapphire vanished. I couldn't help but notice a scent in the shop that day. Lavender, quite distinct. I thought it might be your cologne, Mr. Lyle." His face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched near his jaw. "Lavender? I don't use cologne, Miss Marple. Perhaps it was Mrs. Crane's perfume, or something in the shop itself. My attention was on the gem, not the air." She smiled, her eyes crinkling with what might have been amusement. "A passing fancy of mine. I've also heard you've been to Paris recently, Mr. Lyle. Auction houses, I believe? My nephew Raymond once spoke of such places, where gems change hands discreetly, sometimes without questions asked." Lyle's smile was thin, almost a grimace. "Paris is a hub for the trade, Miss Marple. I visit to study the market, to keep my appraisals sharp. But I assure you, my dealings are above board. I've no interest in illicit sales." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her gaze never leaving his. "Naturally. But I recall a story from a friend in London about an appraiser who facilitated a sale abroad. A ruby, I think, swapped for a fake and sold to a collector who didn't ask too many questions. It was all very clever until a ledger was found detailing the transaction." For a moment, silence hung in the room, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Lyle's hand trembled slightly as he set his cup down, the porcelain clinking against the saucer. "A cautionary tale," he said, his voice steady but his eyes narrowing. "But I'm a careful man, Miss Marple. My reputation depends on it." She leaned forward, her tone as gentle as a grandmother soothing a child. "Of course, Mr. Lyle. Reputations are delicate things, aren't they? Like gems, they can be flawless one moment and flawed the next. I only mention it because the village is full of whispers about a stranger, a thief, even about you leaving the shop late the night before the theft, with a case in hand." His face paled, and he rose abruptly, smoothing his jacket. "Whispers are dangerous, Miss Marple. I was at the shop that evening. Yes, to review some paperwork for Hawthorne. The case held my tools, nothing more. I must go. I've an appointment in town." Miss Marple stood, her movements slow and deliberate. "Thank you for indulging an old woman's curiosity, Mr. Lyle. Do take care. The village is watching, you know." As he left, the door closing softly behind him, Lily emerged from the kitchen, her eyes wide. "Oh, Miss Marple, he looked proper rattled. Did you see his hand shake?" Miss Marple nodded, resuming her seat and picking up her knitting. "I did, Lily. A small thing, but small things often tell the tale." She paused, her needles clicking rhythmically. "Would you be a dear and ask Constable Reed to call on me? I have a suggestion for him." That evening, at Miss Marple's quiet urging, Constable Reed paid a discreet visit to Mr. Lyle's lodgings at the Blue Boar. With the landlord's permission, he searched the appraiser's room and found, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, a slim ledger. Its pages listed transactions with a Parisian auction house, including a recent entry for a sapphire matching the star's description, marked for delivery the following week. Reed, though skeptical of Miss Marple's fancies, took the ledger into evidence, his mind still half fixed on his phantom thief. Miss Marple, knitting by her fire, thought of Lyle's guarded eyes and the lavender scent that clung to him. She recalled a village seamstress from her youth, whose perfect stitches had hidden stolen goods in a quilt's lining, undone by a single loose thread. Lyle, she suspected, was unraveling, his careful mask slipping under the weight of his own secrets. The sapphire, she felt certain, was not far from Saint. Mary Mead, and with a little more patience, she would see it returned. Chapter 9. The Confrontation. The village hall of St. Mary Mead glowed with the warmth of lanterns, their light dancing on the polished wooden floor as the annual autumn fete bustled with life. Stalls laden with jams, knitted scarves, and homemade pies lined the walls, while the air carried the mingled scents of cider and fresh-baked scones. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl neatly draped and her knitting basket at her side, moved through the crowd with the quiet assurance of one who knew every face and every secret they hid. The theft of the Star of Serendib had cast a pall over the village, but tonight she intended to pull the final thread that would unravel the mystery. She had orchestrated a subtle plan, one that required the cooperation of Mr. Hawthorne and the unwitting presence of the suspects. Earlier that day, she had visited the jeweler, suggesting he display a replica sapphire procured from a London contact of her nephew Raymond's at the fete, announcing it as the recovered gem. "It may stir things up, Mr. Hawthorne," she had said, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "People reveal themselves when they think the game is over." Mr. Hawthorne, desperate for resolution, had agreed, his faith in Miss Marple's quiet wisdom outweighing his doubts. Now, as she stood near a table of embroidered cushions, Miss Marple watched the crowd. Mr. Hawthorne, his mustache freshly trimmed, stood by a small display case at the center of the hall, the replica sapphire gleaming under a spotlight. He was in his element, regaling a knot of villagers with the tale of the gem's recovery, his voice carrying a theatrical flourish. "Found by the diligence of our own Constable Reed," he declared, though Reed, standing nearby, looked faintly embarrassed, knowing his pursuit of a phantom thief had yielded little. Mrs. Elspeth Crane, resplendent in a velvet gown and a diamond brooch, hovered near the refreshment table, her face a mask of polite interest, but her eyes darting to the display case. Mr. Edward Grayson, the clerk, lingered at the edge of the crowd, his hands fidgeting with a handkerchief, his gaze shifting nervously between Hawthorne and the gem. And Mr. Vincent Lyle, impeccable in a tailored suit, stood by a window, his gray eyes fixed on the replica with an intensity that belied his calm demeanor. Miss Marple noted the faint sheen of perspiration on his brow, a crack in his polished facade. She approached Mr. Hawthorne, her voice low. "You've done well, Mr. Hawthorne. The village is quite taken with your story. Have you noticed any reactions?" Hawthorne leaned in, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Mrs. Crane keeps staring at the case like she's afraid it'll vanish again. Grayson's been muttering to himself, poor lad. And Mr. Lyle, well, he's been quiet, but I saw him clutch his pocket when I mentioned the gem's return. What are you playing at, Miss Marple?" She smiled, her expression serene. "Just a little test, Mr. Hawthorne. Sometimes the truth needs a nudge to show itself." As the fete continued, Miss Marple maneuvered herself to a chair near the display case, her knitting needles clicking softly as she observed the room. She caught Mrs. Crane's eye and beckoned her over, her tone as warm as a grandmother's invitation to tea. "Mrs. Crane, do join me. Isn't it marvelous to see the sapphire restored? Though I wonder if it's quite the same stone you admired." Mrs. Crane's lips tightened, her fingers clutching her handbag. "It looks the same, Miss Marple, but I'm no expert. I'm just glad Mr. Hawthorne's ordeal is over. It was dreadful being caught up in such a scandal." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes gentle but piercing. "Dreadful, indeed. I heard you and Mr. Lyle discussing a private matter at the tea yesterday. I do hope it wasn't about the sapphire. Such things can be so easily misunderstood." Mrs. Crane's face flushed, and she glanced toward Lyle, who was now speaking with Mrs. Clement. "It was nothing, Miss Marple. Business matter, quite unrelated. Mr. Lyle was advising me on an investment." Miss Marple nodded, her smile unchanging. "Of course, investments can be so delicate, can't they? Like gems, they require careful handling." She turned her gaze to the display case, adding softly, "It's remarkable how a gem can vanish under expert hands, isn't it, Mr. Lyle?" Lyle, who had approached unnoticed, stiffened at her words. His hand moved to his pocket, then dropped as if burned. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth but strained, "you have a vivid imagination. The sapphire's return is proof the matter's settled. Perhaps we should let it rest." The crowd, sensing a shift in the air, grew quieter, their eyes drawn to the exchange. Grayson, hovering nearby, looked as if he might bolt, his face pale. Mrs. Crane's handbag slipped slightly in her grip, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremble in her fingers. The hall, for all its festive cheer, crackled with tension. "Oh, I quite agree, Mr. Lyle," Miss Marple said, her tone disarming. "But I can't help wondering about that evening you were seen at the shop, with a case in hand, and the lavender scent. So distinctive, don't you think? It was in the shop and at my cottage when you visited. Small things, but they do add up. Lyle's eyes narrowed, his composure fraying. I've told you, Miss Marple, I use no cologne, and that evening was for paperwork, nothing more. You're chasing shadows. Mrs. Crane, her voice sharp, interjected. Really, Miss Marple, this is too much. I discussed a legitimate sale with Mr. Lyle, thinking he could arrange it through his contacts. I had no idea it might be connected to the theft. The crowd gasped, and Lyle's face drained of color. Mrs. Crane, you misunderstand, he began, but Grayson, his voice breaking, cut in. I heard you, Mr. Lyle, he blurted, his handkerchief twisting in his hands. On the telephone, that night at the shop, you were talking about a buyer in Paris, saying the stone was already arranged. I didn't think much of it then, but now. The hall fell silent, all eyes on Lyle. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, a soft counterpoint to the rising murmurs. Dear me, she said, her voice gentle but clear. It does seem the sapphire's journey was planned before it vanished. Constable Reed, perhaps you might share what you found in Mr. Lyle's lodgings. Reed, who had been lingering near the door, stepped forward, his face a mix of pride and discomfort. A ledger, Miss Marple, hidden under a floorboard, lists a sapphire, matching the star's description, set for a Parisian auction next week. I was going to question Mr. Lyle tomorrow, but... Lyle's composure shattered. He took a step back, his hand fumbling in his pocket, but Constable Reed was quicker, grasping his arm. That's enough, sir, Reed said. We'll have a proper talk at the station. The crowd erupted in whispers, Mrs. Crane sinking into a chair, her face ashen. Grayson, trembling, looked to Miss Marple with a mix of awe and relief. Mr. Hawthorne, clutching the replica case, stared at Lyle as if seeing him for the first time. Miss Marple rose, smoothing her shawl. It's often the small things, Mr. Hawthorne, she said softly. A scent, a scratch, a whispered word. They tell the story, if one listens. As Reed led Lyle away, the fate resumed its chatter, though the air buzzed with the thrill of revelation. Miss Marple slipped out into the cool night, her basket on her arm, her mind already turning to the next steps. The sapphire, she suspected, was not far, and Lyle's unraveling had only begun. She thought of a village tailor from her youth, whose perfect seams had hidden stolen coins, undone by a single dropped needle. The truth, she knew, was always in the details. Chapter 10. The Confession. The morning after the fete dawned gray and cool in St. Mary Mead, with a fine mist cloaking the village in a veil of quiet mystery. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage parlor, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm, though her thoughts were far from the soft wool in her hands. The confrontation at the village hall had unraveled the careful mask of Mr. Vincent Lyle, and the discovery of his ledger had tightened the net around him. Yet Miss Marple knew that a confession, like a well-knit scarf, required patience to complete. She had asked Constable Reed to bring Lyle to her cottage for a private talk, a request he had granted with a mix of bemusement and respect for her uncanny insight. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 10 when a knock sounded at the door. Lily, her eyes bright with anticipation, ushered in Constable Reed and Mr. Lyle. The appraiser, no longer the polished figure of earlier days, looked drawn, his suit slightly rumpled, and his gray eyes shadowed with strain. Reed, clutching the incriminating ledger, stood by the door, his broad frame filling the space with an air of authority, tempered by uncertainty. "Miss Marple," Reed said, tipping his hat. "Mr. Lyles agreed to answer a few questions here, as you suggested. I'm not sure what you're after, but I've learned to trust your hunches." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her smile as gentle as a spring breeze. "You're very kind, Constable. Mr. Lyle, do sit. Lily has prepared tea, and I find a calm setting does wonders for clarity. I'm sure you have much to tell us." Lyle sank into the offered chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The faint scent of lavender clung to him, a detail that did not escape Miss Marple's notice. "I don't know what you expect, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low but edged with defiance. "The ledger proves nothing. It's a record of appraisals, not theft." She poured tea, her movements deliberate, and handed him a cup. "Of course, Mr. Lyle, ledgers can be innocent things. But this one, found hidden in your lodgings, lists a sapphire remarkably like the Star of Serendib, set for a Parisian auction. And then there's the matter of your late-night visit to the shop, the lavender scent, the scratch on the lock. Small things, but they weave a story, don't they?" Lyle's fingers tightened on the cup, his knuckles whitening. "You're building a castle out of crumbs, Miss Marple. I was at the shop to review documents. The lavender is coincidence, perhaps a cleaner's soap. As for the ledger, it's speculative, not evidence." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Speculation, yes, but the village has a way of turning whispers into truth. Mrs. Crane mentioned a business matter with you, something about a sale. And young Grayson overheard your telephone call, arranging for a buyer in Paris. It's curious, isn't it, how these threads converge?" Lyle's composure cracked, his shoulders sagging. He set the cup down with a clatter, his gaze dropping to the floor. "You don't understand," he muttered. "It wasn't meant to go this far." Reed leaned forward, his notebook at the ready. "What wasn't, Mr. Lyle? If you've something to say, now's the time." Miss Marple's voice was soft, almost maternal. "Tell us, Mr. Lyle. The truth is lighter than a lie, I find. You took the sapphire, didn't you? During those moments alone, when you examined it." For a long moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking clock and the distant chirp of a sparrow. Then Lyle exhaled, a shuddering breath, and looked up, his eyes hollow. "Yes," he whispered. "I took it. I didn't plan to, not at first. But the debts, they were crushing me. A failed investment in London, a loan I couldn't repay. The sapphire was a way out." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged. "Go on, Mr. Lyle. How did you do it?" He ran a hand through his hair, his voice barely audible. "It was simple, really. I've handled gems for years, know every trick. When I examined the star, I had a replica in my case, a glass stone cut to match. I swapped them while Hawthorne was fussing with his counter and Grayson was in the back. The case's lock was easy to nudge open later, during the viewing, to make it seem the theft happened then. I hid the real sapphire in a shipment of lesser stones, already packed for Paris. It's with a dealer there now, waiting for the auction." Reed's pencil scratched furiously, his face a mix of triumph and disbelief. "And Mrs. Crane? Was she in on it?" Lyle shook his head, his voice bitter. "She thought it was legitimate. I told her I could arrange a sale for her own jewels, through my contacts. She was desperate, her fortunes dwindling, though she hides it well. I used her interest to muddy the waters, make it seem she might be involved, but she knew nothing of the theft." Miss Marple leaned back, her needles resuming their quiet rhythm. "And the lavender? Your cologne, I presume?" Lyle's lips twisted in a wry smile. "A habit from my Paris trips. A dealer there recommended it, said it calms clients. I didn't think it would mark me." She smiled, her eyes kind but unwavering. "Small things, Mr. Lyle, always betray, like the scratch on the lock or the leaf in the alley. You were careful, but not careful enough." Reed stood, his voice firm. "That's enough for now, Mr. Lyle. You'll come with me to the station. We'll need the details of that Parisian dealer to recover the gem." Lyle rose, his shoulders slumped, the fight drained from him. "I'm sorry," he said, though whether to Miss Marple, Reed, or himself was unclear. As Reed led him out, Lily hovered by the door, her eyes wide with awe. "Oh, Miss Marple," she whispered, "you did it. You made him confess, just like that." Miss Marple's smile was modest. "Not quite, Lily. He confessed because the truth was too heavy to carry. Now, fetch me another cup of tea, dear. I've some thinking to do." As Lily scurried to the kitchen, Miss Marple gazed out the window, where the mist was lifting to reveal the village's familiar outlines. She thought of a curate from her youth, whose theft of church funds had been uncovered by a misplaced prayer book. Guilt, she knew, was a restless companion, and Lyle's had betrayed him in the end. The sapphire, she trusted, would soon be back in St. Mary Mead, its journey cut short by the quiet persistence of an old woman who saw patterns where others saw only chaos. Chapter 11. The Village Restored. The sun rose over St. Mary Mead with a clarity that seemed to mirror the resolution of the sapphire's theft, bathing the village in a soft, golden light. Miss Jane Marple sat in her garden, a cup of tea cooling on the wrought-iron table beside her, her knitting needles crafting a delicate lace pattern as her thoughts wove the final threads of the case. Mr. Vincent Lyle's confession, extracted in the quiet of her parlor, had lifted the shadow from the village, and the star of Serendib, traced to a discreet Parisian dealer, was en route back to Mr. Hawthorne's shop, courtesy of Constable Reed's diligent telegrams to the French authorities. Yet Miss Marple knew that a village, like a tapestry, needed careful mending to restore its harmony. The Morning Post brought a flurry of activity to her cottage. Lily, her maid, bustled in with a tray of letters, her face alight with the village's latest gossip. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's all anyone can talk about," she exclaimed, setting the tray down. "Mr. Lyle's locked up at the station, and they say the sapphire's coming back by tomorrow. Mrs. Wimpole at the post office reckons you're a proper detective, solving it all with just a chat and a cup of tea." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her smile was modest. "Nonsense, Lily. I merely listened, and people do so like to talk. Have there been any other whispers about our suspects?" Lily nodded eagerly, perching on the edge of a chair. "Mrs. Crane's been quiet, keeping to her house, but her maid says she's been writing letters to London, something about her finances. Mr. Grayson's looking brighter, though. He told the baker he's sorting out his debts, bit by bit. And Mr. Hawthorne's planning to reopen the shop proper, with new locks and all." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind cataloging the details. The village, stirred by the theft, was settling back into its rhythms, but the ripples of human frailty remained. She thought of Mrs. Elspeth Crane, whose polished exterior had masked a dwindling fortune, and young Grayson, whose debts had made him a suspect, but not a thief. Lyle, with his expertise and desperation, had been the true culprit, undone by the small things. A scent, a scratch, a ledger hidden too late. She rose, smoothing her shawl, and decided to pay a final visit to Mr. Hawthorne's shop. The high street was lively, with villagers exchanging nods and murmurs about the recovered gem. The shop's bell tinkled as she entered, and Mr. Hawthorne greeted her with a warmth that bordered on reverence. His mustache was freshly waxed, and his eyes, once clouded with despair, sparkled with relief. "Miss Marple, you're a marvel," he declared, ushering her to the counter. "The sapphire's due back tomorrow, and I've you to thank for it. Constable Reed told me how you cornered Lyle, made him spill everything with that quiet way of yours." She waved a hand, her expression serene. "I did very little, Mr. Hawthorne. Mr. Lyle's own conscience did the work, but I'm glad to hear the star will shine again. Have you taken any precautions for the future?" Hawthorne nodded vigorously, gesturing to a gleaming new lock on the display case. "Oh yes, new bolts on the doors, a stronger safe, and I'm hiring a second clerk to keep things tight. No more lone appraisers either. I'll check every gem myself. This business has taught me a lesson, Miss Marple." She smiled, her eyes drifting to the empty velvet case, soon to hold its rightful occupant. "Lessons are valuable, Mr. Hawthorne. And how is young Grayson faring?" "Better, thank heavens," Hawthorne said, his voice softening. "He came to me yesterday, confessed all about his debts. I've agreed to help him manage them. A small advance on his wages, nothing more. He's a good lad, just caught in a bad patch." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts turning to Mrs. Crane. "And Mrs. Crane, has she been by?" Hawthorne's face clouded slightly. "Not yet, but her maid dropped off a note, saying she'll call when the sapphire's back. I think she's embarrassed, getting tangled up with Lyle's talk of sales. She's donated a tidy sum to the church, though. Says it's to clear the air." Miss Marple's lips twitched, as if amused by the gesture. "How generous. Well, I shan't keep you, Mr. Hawthorne. You've a shop to prepare, and I've my roses to tend." As she stepped into the street, the village seemed to breathe easier, its harmony restored. She passed Mrs. Wimpole, who waved and called out, "You've saved us, Miss Marple," and the baker's boy, who tipped his cap with a shy grin. At the church, she paused to speak with the vicar, who confirmed Mrs. Crane's donation, a gesture of atonement, perhaps, for her unwitting role in Lyle's scheme. Returning to her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the window, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. The sapphire's return would close the case, but the village's secrets, debts, ambitions, fragile facades would always linger, waiting for her sharp eyes to notice. She thought of a village girl from years past, whose stolen locket had been found in a neighbor's attic, revealed by a child's careless word. St. Mary Mead, she mused, was never as simple as it seemed, but its truths were always within reach for those who looked closely. "Lily," she called as her maid passed through, "do fetch me the newspaper. I fancy a quiet read this afternoon." Lily grinned, sensing the calm after the storm. "Right away, Miss Marple, and maybe a biscuit to go with it?" Miss Marple's smile was warm, her mind already turning to the next pattern, hidden in the village's quiet corners. "That would be lovely, dear." Chapter 12. A Final Stitch. Spring had crept into St. Mary Mead, painting the village with bursts of crocus and daffodil, their colors vivid against the greening hedgerows. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlor, her knitting needles crafting a delicate shawl as sunlight streamed through the lace-curtained window. The star of Serendib, returned from its illicit journey to Paris, now gleamed once more in Mr. Hawthorne's shop, its recovery a triumph that had restored the village's pride. The case, unraveled by Miss Marple's quiet persistence, had faded into the gentle hum of local lore, but she knew that every mystery left its mark, like a stitch in the fabric of St. Mary Mead. The Morning Post brought a letter from Paris, its elegant script bearing the seal of the auction house where the sapphire had been traced. Miss Marple opened it with care, her spectacles perched on her nose. The dealer, chastened by the authorities, confirmed the gem's return and offered profuse apologies, citing Mr. Vincent Lyle's deception as the sole cause. Enclosed was a photograph of the star, its deep blue facets catching the light, a silent testament to the truth's emergence. She folded the letter and tucked it into her knitting basket, her lips curving into a faint smile. "All's well that ends well," she murmured, though her mind lingered on the human frailties that had sparked the theft. Lily, bustling in with a tray of tea and scones, caught the tail end of her words. "Talking about the sapphire, Miss Marple?" she asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. "The village hasn't stopped chattering about it. Mrs. Wimpole says you ought to be in one of those detective novels, the way you caught Mr. Lyle out." Miss Marple's smile widened, though her tone was modest. "Nonsense, Lily. I only listened, and people do so love to talk. The truth has a way of slipping out if one pays attention. How is the village settling, do you think?" Lily set the tray down, eager to share. "Oh, it's all back to normal mostly. Mr. Hawthorne's shop is busier than ever, folks coming from miles to see the sapphire. Now it's famous. Mr. Grayson's been promoted, they say, to help with the new locks and all. And Mrs. Crane, well, she's quieter, but she was at church Sunday, looking proper humbled. Donated a new hymn book, too, so the vicar's pleased." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly. "And Mr. Lyle? Any word from the station?" "Constable Reed says he's been sent to London for trial," Lily replied, pouring tea. "They found more in his ledger, other gems he'd swapped over the years. A proper rogue he was, hiding behind that fancy suit." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts drifting to Lyle's confession, the weight of his debts, and the lavender scent that had betrayed him. She recalled a village grocer from her youth, whose pilfered goods were uncovered by a misplaced tally, his charm undone by a single careless act. People, she knew, were predictable in their weaknesses, and Lyle's greed had been no exception. Yet she felt a pang of pity for him, a man whose expertise had led him astray, like a needle slipping from its thread. She rose, setting her knitting aside, and stepped into the garden, where the air was sweet with blossom. The village, bathed in spring's glow, seemed untouched by the winter's scandal, yet Miss Marple knew its secrets would always simmer beneath the surface. Mr. Grayson's debts, now easing under Hawthorne's kindness, spoke of redemption. Mrs. Crane's donation, a gesture of atonement, hinted at a woman grappling with her own fragile pride. And the sapphire, back in its velvet case, was a reminder that even the most brilliant things could be tarnished by human hands. "Lily," she called, turning back to the cottage, "do fetch my shawl. I think I'll take a walk to the shop. It's been a while since I admired Mr. Hawthorne's display." Lily grinned, scurrying inside. "Hoping for another mystery, Miss Marple?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Oh, I hope not, dear, but one never knows what the village might hide." As she strolled down High Street, the familiar faces of St. Mary Mead greeted her, Mrs. Wimpole waving from the post office, the baker's boy tipping his cap. At the shop, Mr. Hawthorne welcomed her with a beaming smile, the star of Serendib gleaming in its case, now guarded by a gleaming new lock. "Miss Marple, you're a sight for sore eyes," he said. "Come to see the star? It's drawing crowds, thanks to you." She peered at the gem, its blue depths catching the light like a captured sky. "It's as lovely as ever, Mr. Hawthorne. You've done well to keep it safe." He chuckled, his mustache twitching. "Learned my lesson, I have. No more trusting strangers with my treasures, though I dare say you'd spot a thief before I would." Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "I only notice what's there to see, Mr. Hawthorne. The village tells its own stories, if one listens." As she left the shop, the spring air soft against her face, Miss Marple felt the case settle into place, like a final stitch in a well-crafted shawl. The sapphire's return had mended the village's pride, but it was the small things, the scent, the ledger, the whispered fears, that had woven the truth. She thought of her old friend Miss Hartnell, whose stolen brooch had been found in a neighbor's garden, revealed by a child's idle chatter. St. Mary Mead, with its quiet lanes and hidden hearts, was a tapestry of such moments, and Miss Marple, with her sharp eyes and gentle ways, was its most careful seamstress.